devastating word from a Mexican border town. Local officials announcing this morning 2 American kidnapping victims are dead. 2 others, authorities say, are alive, and a source tells CNN right now that one of those 2 locked in a battle to survive. The race against the clock to find the hostages started last week in Matamoros, just across the border, with a brazen attack. You can see it here. Gunmen firing on that white minivan before pulling Americans from the car and speeding away. CNN's John Miller is working his sources from New York. CNN's Kylie Atwood monitoring this from the State Department. We begin with our security correspondent, Josh Campbell, in Los Angeles. Josh, what's the latest on the sad tragedy here?
Yeah, sad indeed, John. And, since this incident began, I've been talking to sources, trying to get information about where these victims were, what the U.S. government was doing to try to find them. And to a person, these sources told me that, look, the prospect here is very grim. And that is because of that video that you just showed, that graphic video where you see individuals being loaded and shoved into the back of that white vehicle. One U.S. official told me that that appeared to be the aftermath of this original incident. And because of that violent nature of the attack, as well as you see people being loaded into the car that didn't appear to be moving. Again, the sources feared the worst, even as they work to try to release these captives. We are learning, as you mentioned, though, the breaking news here that 2 of those American citizens were found deceased. Of the other 2, those who survived, I'm told that one is in grave condition, was severely wounded during this encounter. Now, as far as where they were found, a source tells me that it was at some type of clinic in Matamoros, which of course is the area where these American citizens traveled when they went from South Carolina to Texas and then into Mexico seeking some type of medical procedure. They, of course, were quickly met by gunfire as they traveled into Mexico. One source told me that law enforcement believes at this point that a cartel known as the Gulf Cartel mistook these American citizens for Haitian drug smugglers, opened fire. I'm told that law enforcement doesn't believe this began as a kidnapping operation. It was some type of kill operation between 2 types of rival factions. However, these American citizens mistaken for drug smugglers. They were engaged by these attackers and then taken away. And of course, where this goes from now, I'm told, John, by a source just before we got on the air, that Mexican officials will be conducting the forensic examination of the 2 bodies, those 2 who are deceased. After that medical examiner does the review to determine the cause of death, those remains will be handed over to the U.S. government and then repatriated back to the homes of those victims. And of course, there's a long investigation to go for the FBI working with their Mexican authorities to try to hold accountable those responsible, John.
Josh Campbell, appreciate that. Let's continue the conversation about law enforcement with John Miller. John, what are you learning from your sources? And help our viewers understand, this is sort of a wild, wild west place in Mexico, known to law enforcement on that side of the border and in the sometimes successful, sometimes not successful coordination between American officials and their Mexican counterparts.
So, as you say, John, this is right across the border from Brownsville, Texas. It is a level 4 no-go State Department travel advisory, do not travel, the highest advisory that they give. Yet, there are many people who cross over that border for these medical appointments or to go to these drugstores where you can buy over-the-counter things that would be prescription here, buy drugs cheaper. A lot of people are getting counterfeit drugs there. That match, names of painkillers that are hard to come by here. So there's a lot of traffic, tourist traffic, medical tourism there. But what you see here is an instance where you've got a crossover because that territory is largely controlled by the Gulf Cartel. The Gulf Cartel is one of the oldest, longest running, strongest, heavily armed cartels. And when you look at that vehicle, you see that bullet hole in the driver's side window. You see a bullet hole directly below that at the top of the door. Further back in the vehicle, the passenger side window is completely raked out. And if that passenger side door were closed, you would see that the tire, the rear tire has been shot out. There's another bullet hole above that. So we have a car that was raked with gunfire, which is kind of our preview to the idea that 2 of our American victims here, sadly, are deceased because they opened fire into that vehicle, dragged them out. And then in talking to the victim, who we believe may be the one who survived, based on the video we've seen of her being put into the truck, Tay Washington McGee, who was down there for her second visit to complete a surgical procedure. It appears that they would have been talking to her and figuring out these are not what we suspected, and that's been the working theory, that they thought that they were taking some competing Haitian smuggling gang out, but that they'd run into Americans. John, that of course creates a problem, which is we have now shot and wounded and or killed Americans that have nothing to do with the criminal world, which makes them a bit of a hot potato to that cartel. So this is our blind spot right now. Did the cartel turn them over by leaving them somewhere to try and take the pressure out of this problem between them, the Mexican government, and the United States? Or did the Mexican government use intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, locate them, and rescue them? And that's what we're hoping to learn from that press conference that's coming up.
Yeah, key details still to come, but Kylie Atwood at the State Department, follow up on that point from John Miller. The White House says it wants answers from Mexican authorities as soon as possible. The Attorney General says he will work with partners in Mexico to try to get the answers here. As John Miller noted, this is an area the State Department long has said to Americans, please, it is not safe. But what now?
Yeah, well, what U.S. officials are looking to learn is just more details about what actually went down here. We just heard from the White House NSC's John Kirby, who did appear to confirm that some in this group are dead and some are alive. Obviously, Mexican authorities are the ones who said that 2 of these 4 Americans have died and 2 are alive at this point. But what John Kirby said is that the U.S. is extending its deepest condolences to those who were killed, but he also referenced those who survived this attack. And the next steps here for the U.S. government, specifically for State Department officials, is notifying the families of those Americans as to what happened and what their conditions are. Of course, continuing to monitor that situation if those who are still alive are in critical condition. And so what we're watching for is that notification to happen, and then we'll probably learn more from the State Department as to, what happened here, what questions remain. I think it's also important to note that it's not just the State Department that warned Americans against traveling to this region of Mexico due to the criminal activity, due to the gang violence and the murders that happened there, but it's also the CDC that has warned Americans against traveling there for medical tourism, saying that there can be many complications that arise from those procedures, and we know that it is a medical, cosmetic procedure that led this group of 4 to actually travel to this region.
And John Miller, let me try to button it up this way. You mentioned this is one of the best known, longest running, longest in power cartels. The State Department for a long time has told Americans it is not safe, which gets to the point that this cartel has been allowed to function, and this inner border, the cross-government cooperation, is supposed to be to put these cartels out of business. Why this one so frustrating and, in this case, so deadly?
Well, this is all about making money that cartel generates, not in the millions, John, as you know, in the billions. These are the main suppliers of fentanyl, which is killing Americans here, based on chemicals they get from China, and then money they launder with Chinese organized crime groups on the way out. And the Mexican government has faced both problems of corruption on the state police level and on the federal police level that has been long running, but also the struggle of the cartels that will battle the government with their armies. And that has cost many brave Mexican lives. So what you're actually seeing in the background, I know Kylie's feeling some of this, we're seeing some of this now, is the Mexican government and the U.S. have this close relationship. Our law enforcement teams work together. But there is that feeling that, the Mexican government is in charge, even when Americans are involved. And part of the disconnect we're watching right now, which is why is there so little information available to U.S. authorities who have been on top of this, is that the Mexican government is showing we're running this operation and we'll tell the story when we think it's time.
Well, obviously, from the White House down in the government, they're demanding answers on this side of the border. Those families obviously deserve answers as well. John Miller, Josh Campbell, Kylie Atwood, appreciate you bringing us the latest on this, and we'll stay on top of this as we get new information throughout the day.